Hi guys, my name is Adrian Santos, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the DevOps Summer 2019 work. I was a part of the DevOps team, and a lot of the focus this semester was on building a CI/CD pipeline from scratch, pretty much. Um, we used Docker images as one of our main drivers for a lot of our agents. We also of course, created build pipelines, deployment pipelines, as well as server configurations. So in this video, I kind of want to talk about the work that I did, followed by a list of essentially errors that are still persistent or issues that are still persistent in our pipelines, and work that can be done in the future. So the first part that I want to talk about is Bitbucket. Bitbucket is essentially the first section of the CI/CD pipeline. It is the driver of the CI part, CI standing for continuous integration. So Bitbucket is used as a repository in which we push our changes and our new features and our bug fixes and pretty much everything. And this is stored on FIU's servers. So if we head on over to, let's go into effort DevOps for a second. Effort. So as you can see, we have a fair amount of repos. Each one of them has something important. So for example, the effort database contains information about the effort DB. I believe in here, yeah, there are SQL scripts, which essentially build up effort. Other than that, we have the DevOps. I made a video on this already. The DevOps is used by the EFPO team, and in here is where we keep our most updated backpack file, and this is what is grabbed on our build pipeline that runs the functional tests. This backpack file is grabbed, and a database instance is brought up and created right before the tests begin. We also have the Forex data folder, Forex data folder MQL5, effort old repos. This is just a bunch of all repositories, just in case we ever have to go back and take a look in there. Of course, the effort web app and web API, which is the actual project, as well as effort functional tests and VPS API. Functional tests is where the EFPO team will work on for the most parts. I also made a video on how this repository works and how it all connects to our build pipelines. So this is kind of the first part of CI, which is just pushing changes to this repository. Now from here, Bamboo, which is the next part of CI, will understand and will know when there are those triggers made, such as commits or pull requests or merges, and it will trigger what is called a build pipeline, and we'll get to that in the next part. So the next part is, of course, Bamboo. So Bamboo is think of it as a place where you set up build pipelines, deployment pipelines. It's essentially a cloud server in which you can set up build pipelines that are triggered and run specific scripts or commands, or you can do a lot of things with them. There are many other different forms of CI/CD tools. There's TeamCity. There is the Google Kubernetes Cloud, but the one that we decided to use was Bamboo because it's fairly it's number one. It's part of the Atlassian products, as well as it's very easy to integrate with Bitbucket. So as you can see, this is the build dashboard. During this semester, we created a total of 5 build pipelines, and I'll go over each one of them in more detail. Starting with the functional tests private, this build pipeline, all it really does is it's essentially only for the EFPO team. So whenever a change, I'll open this up real quick. So whenever anything is put in any branch other than master, it will get picked up by this pipeline here. So to continue on talking about the CI/CD pipeline. I'll actually go into one of them. So in this case, functional tests private. And as you can see, if you configure the plan, you'll see a lot of setup. So in the plan configuration, you have things such as plan details, which you can add the project name, descriptions, the plan name, etc. You have your stages. In this case, we have two: setup and build. You can add as many as you need. Setup just sets up the database, and build builds the actual project. Repositories here is where you actually can link a new repository if needed. And you have triggers as well. The trigger that we have is if either functional test or the web app and web API essentially there's a commit or there's a change, it will trigger this build pipeline to go off under any of these branches. Same thing with branches. This is just set up for branches, dependencies, permissions. These are all setups that you can configure for the plan that, of course, I worked on. And whenever you go into a stage or a job, you also set up tasks. Of course, I made a video on how you can actually make all of these tasks and how everything connects, and you can check that one out if you want it more in depth. So essentially, the functional test pipeline, the private one at least, all it does is it runs private tests for the EFPL team, and anything in the master branch will actually get tested against effort. The next pipeline I'm going to talk about is the publish artifacts pipeline. This is one of our deployment pipelines. So this here, we configure the plan. As you can see, they're all very similar. They all work in similar ways. It's just really the stages and tasks that make them different. So in this case, this pipeline deploys, well, it doesn't actually deploy this. This is what publishes the artifacts of Effort Web API and Web App. So whenever there's a change to either master, which goes to the production server, or develop, which goes to the pre-production server, whenever there is a commit, or well, there wouldn't actually ever be any commits. It would actually be only pull requests. That's the only way to get any code into either develop or master. Whenever there is a change to develop, this would trigger, which would then, of course, check out the source code, build it, and publish it. So this is another pipeline that I worked on. Another one is the publish VPS API artifacts. This one, similarly to publish artifacts, it's essentially the same thing. The only difference here is that this is for the VPS APIs. So the repository here is the VPS API rather than effort. So it just publishes the web APIs for this pipeline. And of course, the way that you set up the artifacts is under this artifact section here. And then you can edit and you can change the name and the location of where the artifacts will actually be, which should usually always be in the build folder in the project, which is netcore app 2.1/publish. The next pipeline is the run functional tests. So this is very similar to the functional test pipeline, but this is the actual real pipeline that gets tested against effort. So from here, it pulls the files, or it'll pull the test project from the master branch in the EFPO's personal repository, which is the functional test repository. It'll pull whatever is in master, the test project that's in master. It'll pull the latest develop or master branch from effort, and it'll run the tests from here against here. And of course, there's another video on how to update DevOps, but the DevOps repository contains the instructions on how to set up the database, which is necessary to run functional tests. As you can see, this setup database stage, all it does is it checks out from DevOps and it builds the database. I also made a video on how to update this database. And lastly, there is the run unit tests pipeline. I didn't work closely in this pipeline. This was mainly done by Ronald, another engineer in the another lead in DevOps as well. But this pipeline very similarly, this is just to run unit tests. So it'll build efforts and then it'll run a .NET command if I'm not mistaken. Yep, a .NET command, a .NET test. You don't have to add .NET because you're using the .NET Core CLI. So it's just whatever follows after .NET. So test, and then he specified here the project directory with some configuration. And that's essentially the CI section of the project. This is a lot of the work that I did on getting this working, getting this connected with Bitbucket, and having all of this actually work. So that was a lot of how to kind of build the CI and the CI section, at least, of pipelines. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Docker images, which we used as one of our main drivers in creating agents for the environment. So I believe there is a video made, Ron made a video on exactly how the Docker image for the agent environment worked, but I'll kind of give an overview of how it works on Bamboo. So we head on over to the settings, the actual Bamboo administration settings, and you go to the agents tab. You'll be able to see, as you can see, we have here, how many? 6 agents. Pre-prod, VPS1, VPS2. These are agents installed on VPS 0, VPS1, and VPS 2. These are not using Docker. These are just Java agents. What I mean by Java agents is that if you head on over to install remote agent, you have to download the remote agent jar and you run this command in terminal. You can specify some other things and it'll connect to Bamboo. Once you go into the agent authentication, it'll ask you to authenticate. If you go on here, you'll see the pending request to authenticate with Bamboo. You just approve it and the installation will finish and you'll see it here. So those are actual Java agents, but a lot of our build and testing agents, well, I'm pretty sure all 3 of them are done using Docker. And Docker images, again, definitely do research on it, but Docker images are essentially a very low cost virtual machine. There is no GUI. You can only run bash in it, so only using commands is how you can get around the machine essentially. And Docker containers, the great thing about them is that they are, number one, very light, so they're usually going to be faster, and they're very easy to install dependencies that maybe on Windows you can't do or maybe on Macs you can't do. You can usually always install them on Docker images. So for Redis, for Unit, and this one here, which is Sable, I'm not sure what this one does, but Redis and Unit I know are build agents that run our tests as well, the functional tests and the unit tests. Those are made using Docker. Again, I recommend looking up into Docker. It's a powerful tool that that powers a lot of what we worked in the semester. Same thing with the database, the local database. We had a lot of issues with Mac users not being able to actually get the database running. So I made a Docker image which brought up an instance of MSSQL with the database, and with a simple Docker compose command, the EFPO team was able to get running fairly quick. So the next part, it's going to be the deployment pipelines, and I'll talk a little bit about my work involved in that. So if we go to the deployment projects, as you can see, we have 2 deployment projects. We have the staging deployment for effort and staging the deployment for effort web app and web API. Sorry, this is the VPS API, this is the web API. So we ended up doing a disconfiguration for VPS API at least. Whenever there is a change to the develop branch, and I'll head on over to Bitbucket just to show that. Whenever there is a change done to develop, it will trigger this deployment for the staging. So what it'll do is that it'll bring down the VPS 0, VPS 1, VPS 2 pre-production VPS API instances and bring up 3 new ones. The production ones, however, will stay live, And whenever there is a change to the master branch, similarly the production VPS 0, VPS 1, and VPS 2 will get brought down and re-deployed with the new code, but the staging will stay online. So we ended up doing this so that there are enough VPS APIs for load balancing mainly, and as well as separating the two of them so that you could always test the staging before you push it to production. So similarly, we did the same for effort. Of course, there's just staging and production. Staging is a pre-production server, and this is the server that EFPO tests on, as well as Professor Shijari. Whatever gets approved on here will move on to production, which is the master branch, and that's what actually goes on the live site, which this is hosted in VPS 1. So I worked on both of these. Similarly, once you get the hang of how one works, it's very similar work. So I'll go ahead and show staging for effort web app and API. If we edit the environment. So here I also made a video on how you can deploy, how do you make deployment pipelines. Recommend to check that out if you're part of the DevOps team and you have to continue this work. But essentially, just a quick roundup. Deployment pipeline is very similar to the build pipelines that I showed a little bit earlier. It's pretty much run by tasks. It'll essentially just download it'll erase the old website and download the new artifacts down into the site and just restart the website. And that's pretty much good to go. Now with the deployment pipeline, I did want to talk about one big issue that we had and we still currently have. We thought we solved it, but it came back, and it has to do with security. So if I go back to the staging pipeline, as you can see, this is a very weird zigzag of failed deployments and good deployments. And the reason why this happens is due to a security in the server. So some work for the next wave of students would be to figure out essentially how to get this to work. So the issue we're having is that whenever there was a change made to develop, for example, it would trigger the build pipeline, which that would of course pass, and then from the build pipeline it would trigger the deployment pipeline. However, when the task that removes the old website would run, we would get this issue where it'll say unauthorized access exception, pretty much saying that the server does not authorize Bamboo to remove the old site. We're not entirely sure why this was happening because the Bamboo agent has admin rights as well as all the users pretty much to the server. However, if you run it as an actual user, so myself, it would immediately pass without a problem. As you can see, it's zigzag, so whenever the actual Bamboo agent would deploy, it would fail. When I would deploy, it would pass, fail, and manual run would pass. Where we never really got time to figure out why exactly the this was happening, the issue was happening, but that's definitely some work that needs to be done, which would greatly increase the automation of the build pipeline, the build and deployment pipeline. So the last thing I would like to talk about is the server configurations and my work on actual VPS 0, 1, and 2. So we head on over this right now. I'm logged into VPS 0. This is the pre-production server. And as you can see, this is IIS Manager, Internet Information Services. And so a lot of the work that I did here was on getting essentially this section here set up and working. So as you can see, effort, this is the actual live site. Whenever you hit the URL sr-proj-effort.cis.fiu.edu, you have to do a /effort, and then it would bring you to the actual effort home. And I believe you can actually access the application. Browse, yeah. Of course, here it'll be localhost /effort, but on the actual on from your computer, it would be it wouldn't be this. Um, so yeah, as you can see in here, this is where all the files are hosted. From here on down, this is all the deployment files, and this is the API files, with of course the deployment API files. Um, Other than effort, we also have some shared folders, which are accessible from localhost as well. They're FTP folders. So for example, if you do effort shared, you're able to access the files in that directory. Um, and this is essentially how the commands in the deployment pipelines, the commands run there would essentially be just commands run on PowerShell here. So whenever we restart the site, there's an actual button for it. Restart, it would actually bring it down and turn it back on. So yeah, each and also as you can see, we have the VPS pre-prod and prod endpoints here as well. Whenever you make a site such as effort or VPS pre-prod or VPS prod, there's this thing called application pool, which essentially you can set up identities. In this case, VPS and VPS prod have two different identities. They're set up in here. So whenever you make a site, you would assign um, there's a button that would say to add an application pool. It's not there because it already has one, but you would assign an application pool to it, and that's how you can set up identities for those websites. So as you can see, a lot of the work that I did revolved around the CI/CD pipeline and getting pretty much everything from build to test to deployment automated so that the development teams don't have to worry about those problems. They don't. They simply, all they have to do, the end goal essentially is for them to just simply check out a feature branch, push their stuff to it. They will get instantaneous feedback if their unit tests are failing. If all their unit tests pass, they would merge it into the sprint branch. The sprint branch would then run old UAT tests, all old functional or integration tests, and they would also get immediate feedback to see if they broke something that should not be broken in the past, or maybe they changed something that affects a test. So then the EFPO team would have to um, fix those tests. And once everything is fine on the sprint branch, they would be able to merge into develop. Develop would automatically get deployed. Old functional tests would also be able would be running on develop as well as Sujati would be testing by himself. And whatever new tests the EFPO teams would also get automatically tested against effort. And this should all happen one after the other automatically. There should not be a lot of manual work done. Once there, it should then be able to get merged into master, and similarly, the live site should be able to come down and come back up with the new code all by itself. So that is what DevOps is about, building this pipeline to make developers' lives a lot easier and for them to be able to work on their features without the hassle of having to figure out how to deploy, how to merge, how to pretty much get all of these things working.